Well, let's get it started off with something I hope you'll enjoy. And that's understanding strategy as a core concept to what Mike and I discuss here each week. In that vein, can you explain the concept of a cargo cult and why it's such an interesting case study for how companies approach innovation?
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of cargo cults comes from an old book, and Michael, you might help me with the title, or you might help me with the publishing date, but God, it's probably 10, 15 years old book, something like that. And it's actually explaining how we as society create religions. So it's not a business book. It's a book that talks about religions, and apparently they researched some tribes, some native tribes in some on some islands in the Pacific,
Yeah.
and the story goes something along the lines of the war in the Pacific, Second World War in the Pacific. The US military needed some bases to resupply their troops that were fighting overseas against the Empire of Japan. And obviously, they found these islands. These people weren't necessarily, foreigners to the idea of white people and developments outside of their island, but they haven't actually interacted a lot with advanced civilizations over the past few hundred years. And when the U.S. military came, they set up outposts there, resupply bases. So these people were basically just seeing cargo planes landing, offloading broken tanks, broken jeeps, broken equipment, taking off. The following morning, an equal amount of tanks was arriving, fixed and ready to go to battle. Same for jeeps, same for any other equipment. Well, it was all great for them to see this, and at one point the war ended, and the U.S. no longer needed those islands. They pulled out. They moved their supplies somewhere else. Now, what's interesting is what's happening today. And by today, I actually mean now in 2020, 26, right? So it's not like what happened 50, 60 years ago. It's just what's happening now. Now, these people on these remote islands still go to these abandoned runways every day. They light up fires and they do these like landing signals with fires, hoping that the cargo planes will return and they will bring food, they will bring medicine, and they would continue doing that cycle. So, in essence, what this story is telling us is that sometimes we tend to replicate the gestures without actually understanding how things are being made. And if you translate this to innovation, if you translate this to growth, right? You tend to have this perspective in an established organization that, look, if we're just going to copy the way things happen in successful and growing companies over here, copy it one to one, we are miraculously going to become as successful with growth as they are. And I'm not trying to criticize people now, but I've heard one too many stories of, established organizations going to Sweden and study the Spotify way. And they go and do the Spotify training. I'm not saying that Spotify training and Spotify way of working doesn't work, because it does, but it works for the Spotify context. Try applying that into an established bank, into an established pharma company, an established, you know, energy company. That will fail. So you have to understand what are the principles behind the Spotify way, with air quotes. It doesn't have to be Spotify, and then replicate that in your environment rather than just copying it one to one and hoping that miraculously growth will happen and agility will happen.
Hey, you've just watched a clip from Show Your Priors podcast. Check out our main channel for full episodes. We have a new one every Tuesday. If you liked what you saw, give us a like and subscribe. It's free for you and helps us out a ton. Did we miss something during our discussions? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next one.